The first thing I remember is the rain, not a downpour. A steady tap on the windshield that sounded like fingers keeping time. The cab smelled like old coffee and wet gear. Louis sat beside me, hood up, scrolling through songs he never finished. The heater hummed. The town felt emptied out, streetlights floating in fog like quiet buoys on a black sea. Nights like that made the work feel simple. You wait, you listen, you go. The radio murmured distant calls from other units, a soft quilt of voices and codes. I took a slow sip, burned my tongue, and watched our red lights pulse against a closed storefront. My hands knew the ritual without thinking. Gloves in the door pocket, trauma shears clipped, airway roll checked twice. Calm fills the spaces if you let it. Then the spaces felt too wide. The silence between transmissions stretched, thin and tight. I glanced at the dash clock, glowing faint green. 2:41 a.m. I didn't know it yet, but that time would live under my skin. We rolled through the quiet blocks where the streetlights hummed louder than the engines. Most people were asleep by then, and that silence was the kind of peace only night workers ever understand. Every corner felt familiar. The same liquor store, the same gas station clerk waving at us through the window, the same homeless man curled under the bus stop roof. You start to memorize your city from behind the wheel of an ambulance. You learn which streets breathe and which ones don't. The radio kept us company, dispatch cycling through minor calls. Fainting at a diner, an allergic reaction, someone locked in their own bathroom. We handled what came. One elderly woman with chest pain, another patient who just needed oxygen and reassurance. We moved like clockwork, fast hands, steady voices. Luis cracked jokes to keep our brains from fogging over. He was good at that. He could pull a smile out of anyone, even when things turned bad. By the time we returned to the bay, the coffee machine had burned through another pot. I leaned against the counter, half listening to the nurses laugh about something I couldn't catch. The clock on the wall read 2:35 a.m. I remember that exact time because the building lights flickered once, quick enough for no one else to notice, long enough to make my stomach twist. When we stepped back into the ambulance, the streets looked darker than before. The fog had thickened, swallowing the curbs and traffic lights. Luis adjusted the radio volume, and I could hear faint static layered under the dispatch chatter. A new transmission cut through, broken, muffled, uncertain. Unit 917, the voice stuttered, quiet as a whisper. Respond to Old Mill Road. The voice that came through the speaker didn't sound like our usual dispatcher. It was softer, slower, as if whoever spoke wasn't entirely sure we could hear them. The words broke apart with static. Old Mill Road, possible injury, unknown condition. Then silence. No follow-up, no acknowledgement tone. Luis frowned and leaned closer to the radio. Did she just say Old Mill Road? He asked, but I didn't answer right away. That name stirred something strange, like hearing a song you forgot you knew. I pulled up the navigation tablet, but the map lagged, loading gray squares instead of streets. Coordinates are showing Wenny, but no address, I said quietly. Luis laughed under his breath. That place was shut down years ago, man. There's nothing out there. Still, we couldn't ignore it. Ignoring a call, even a weird one, eats at you. So we logged the dispatch and started the engine. The sound of the wipers kept time with my pulse. Outside, the fog had deepened, softening every light until the world looked half asleep. We radioed for confirmation, but no one answered. Not dispatch, not another unit, just static. Luis muttered, probably a glitch in the system. Maybe cross-channel interference. I wanted to agree, but my gut wouldn't let me. The further we drove, the more the familiar buildings disappeared behind us. The city gave way to open fields and dead trees bent like shadows over the road. Halfway there, the radio clicked again. Same voice. Same broken tone. Unit 917, status? It faded before I could respond. Luis turned down the siren, uneasy. The only sound left was the hum of the tires rolling over cracked pavement. I remember thinking how wrong the air felt. Too still for rain, too quiet for night. We drove on anyway. The turn onto Old Mill Road felt like crossing into a different world. The pavement gave way to uneven gravel that popped beneath the tires, and the fog pressed tight against the windshield like it didn't want to let us see what waited ahead. The trees leaned over the road, their branches heavy with dripping rain, forming a tunnel that swallowed our headlights whole. We followed the coordinates until the GPS froze, arrow blinking in place. The signal dropped completely. No data, no radio connection. Luis sighed, checking his watch. 3 a.m. Sharp, he said, let's make it quick. But even his voice carried a hesitation I'd never heard before. Then through the blur of mist, the beam of our headlights caught something metallic ahead. A car, old, rusted, half sunk into the mud at the edge of the woods. Its hazard lights blinked weakly, but the engine wasn't running. We pulled up slowly, siren off, lights dimmed. I opened the door and the smell of wet earth and gasoline hit me like a wall. The air felt heavy, like it carried more weight than it should. Every step toward that car sounded too loud, the crunch of gravel echoing where there should have been nothing but rain. I called out, EMS, can you hear me? No answer. Luis swung the flashlight toward the driver's side. The door hung open. Rain had soaked the seats. There was no movement inside. Just a dark shape slumped forward against the steering wheel. I moved closer, boots sinking into the mud, and reached out to tap the frame. The door creaked as if something shifted from within. That's when I heard it. A faint groan, low and breathy, like the sound someone makes after waking from a nightmare. Luis met my eyes. Someone's in there. The fog swallowed our breath as we pulled the stretcher from the back. Whatever was inside that car hadn't called for help in years. The flashlight beam caught his face first. Pale, drained of color, skin stretched tight like he'd been there longer than a few minutes. Rainwater ran down his cheeks, collecting at the edge of his collar. I leaned in and pressed 2 fingers to his neck, pulse faint but there. He's alive, I said, and Luis was already opening the stretcher beside me. We moved with habit more than thought. I checked his airway, listened for breathing, pressed a stethoscope against his chest. Shallow, uneven. His clothes were soaked through and his skin felt cold enough to bite. Luis adjusted the oxygen mask while I checked his wrist for ID. That's when I noticed the faded hospital band. The ink had almost disappeared, but a date showed faintly beneath the creases. 3 years old. The name, Samuel Doran, looked familiar, though I couldn't say why. We lifted him out carefully, water dripping from his jacket, and slid him onto the stretcher. His head rolled slightly, mouth parting as he let out a rough exhale. For a second, I thought he was trying to speak. I leaned closer, and that's when it came. A whisper so soft it barely existed. You came back. I froze. His eyes were still closed, his pulse barely there. Luis hadn't heard it. He just asked, "You good?" I nodded too fast. "Yeah." He's in shock. My voice didn't sound like mine. Inside the ambulance, I wrapped him in thermal blankets and started fluids. The monitors flickered weakly before stabilizing. I focused on numbers, not thoughts. Routine keeps your hands steady when your brain starts to slip. But something about him bothered me. Not fear exactly, more like recognition. As we shut the doors and started toward the hospital, I glanced at the rearview mirror. His reflection wasn't where it should have been. The stretcher was there, but for a heartbeat it looked empty. I blinked, shook it off. Exhaustion, I told myself, just exhaustion. but deep down I already knew something about this patient didn't belong to the living. The road back to the hospital stretched longer than it ever had before. The rain had softened to a drizzle, but the sound of it against the roof came in uneven bursts, like something tapping from above. Luis drove with both hands locked on the wheel, eyes forward, saying nothing. The siren stayed off. The night didn't feel right for noise. Inside the ambulance, the air felt colder than outside. I adjusted the heater twice, but it didn't change. My breath fogged as I checked the monitor again. The patient's vitals made no sense. Oxygen levels climbed, then dropped, then spiked again as if the machine couldn't decide if he was alive or dead. I replaced the sensors. Same result. Luis called out from the driver's seat. "Radio's acting weird, getting feedback." I could hear it too, a faint crackle of static under the hum, like someone whispering through the line but never forming words. I reached for the receiver, but before I could, the patient's hand twitched. His fingers scraped against the stretcher rail. I leaned closer, checking for seizure activity. Nothing. His eyes were still closed, but the pulse reading jumped sharply, then vanished. The screen went black for 2 full seconds before lighting back up. Luis cursed softly under his breath. "Power surge?" I didn't answer. The air inside the rig felt thicker now, harder to breathe. I could smell something faint and metallic, almost like rust. Then came the softest sound, a single whisper that curled through the air, drawn out and deliberate. My name. I froze, eyes snapping toward him. His mouth hadn't moved. The whisper came again, same tone, same rhythm, but this time closer, like it came from the space between us. Luis turned around, face pale. "What did you say?" I didn't. We stared at each other for a long moment, the road vibrations humming beneath our feet. The patient lay still again, monitors calm and steady. Nothing looked wrong anymore, but the feeling wouldn't fade. That slow, crawling sense that someone else was in the ambulance with us, breathing just a little out of sync. The whisper didn't leave my head. Even when the radio hissed back to life, the sound still lingered, circling my thoughts like static that wouldn't clear. Luis tightened his grip on the steering wheel, knuckles pale under the dim red lights. "We're only 10 minutes out," he said, his voice dry. But time had stopped meaning anything inside that van. The heart monitor flickered again, flatlining for half a second, then returning with erratic peaks. The patient's chest rose and fell in uneven bursts, each one louder than it should have been. I leaned forward, checking for obstruction, and that's when the temperature dropped. The heater light still glowed, but cold air poured from the vents, biting at my fingers. Luis slammed the dashboard. "Everything's glitching. You seeing this?" I didn't answer. My focus was locked on the stretcher. The patient's hand had slipped free from the strap and now rested against the metal rail. Slowly, impossibly, it began to move, dragging across the blanket like something waking up. Then the monitor cut out completely. The interior lights dimmed, pulsing once, twice, before plunging us into a faint red glow from the emergency bulbs. The siren flickered off mid-tone. All I could hear was the thud of my own heartbeat. I called for Luis to stop, but before he could, the patient sat upright. His eyes were open now, glassy and fixed on the front window. His chest wasn't rising anymore. Still, a sound came from him. Low, mechanical, almost electrical. Through the radio, the static broke apart into a single voice. My voice. "Don't stop driving." Luis turned toward me, confusion twisting into fear. "What did you just—" "I didn't say that," I whispered. The voice came again, louder. "Keep going." Then silence. The patient's eyes rolled back, his body collapsing like a string had been cut. The monitor snapped back on, reading 0 across every line. Luis kept driving, jaw locked tight, headlights cutting through the fog like knives. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. Every part of me screamed to open the door and run, but something told me, if we stopped, we wouldn't make it out at all. By the time we reached the hospital, the storm had thinned to a quiet drizzle. The parking bay lights flickered as the ambulance rolled to a stop. The moment the engine died, the silence hit. Thick, absolute, like sound itself had stepped back. Luis exhaled hard, rubbing his face with both hands. "Let's get him inside," he muttered, voice trembling just enough to give him away. I turned to release the stretcher straps, but something stopped me cold. The blanket was still there, the oxygen mask, the monitor leads. But the patient was gone. The stretcher was completely empty. "Luis?" My voice cracked. He looked over his shoulder, frowning. "What?" "He's not here. That's not funny. I'm not joking." He came around the side, eyes darting from the equipment to the floor. No footprints, no water, no blood, just the hum of the ambulance lights. He opened the rear doors, expecting to see someone outside, but the lot was empty, every space bare, every doorway still. We ran inside, shouting for staff. 2 nurses turned from the counter, startled. One of them, Karen, asked, "What patient?" when I tried to explain. I repeated the details, even showed her the hospital band I'd taken from his wrist. She looked at it like it was a trick. "This name's not in our system," she said. Luis went pale. He checked his radio for the dispatch log, scrolling through timestamps. Nothing. The last recorded call was from hours earlier. Unrelated, routine. No entry for Old Mill Road. For a few seconds, we just stood there, breathing too fast. The automatic doors behind us slid open with a soft hiss, though no one entered. The motion sensor light blinked once and went still again. I finally said, "Let's just file a report." It sounded ridiculous even as it left my mouth. Luis nodded, but his hands shook while he wrote. Neither of us looked at each other. That night I drove home in silence. The road felt longer than ever, every shadow in the rain twisting into something that looked like it wanted to follow. I didn't sleep that morning. I just sat in my kitchen with the lights off, the sound of the refrigerator humming in the background. My uniform still smelled like rain and metal. I kept replaying it. The drive, the whisper, the empty stretcher. Every second felt like a scene from a memory that didn't belong to me anymore. By sunrise, I needed answers. I went straight to dispatch headquarters before my shift ended. The woman on duty looked confused when I gave her our call time. "We didn't issue anything at 2:41, she said. I told her to check again. She did. Nothing. The system showed 0 outgoing calls between 2:30 and 3. Even the digital backup log was blank, like the entire half hour had been wiped clean. Luis came in later, looking worse than I'd ever seen him. He dropped a stack of old incident reports on the counter. "You're not gonna believe this," he said quietly. He'd searched through archives for any reference to Old Mill Road. There was one, an accident report from 3 years ago. A single vehicle collision. Driver pronounced dead at the scene. Name, Samuel Doran. I read it 3 times before the words started to mean anything. Same car model, same road, same hour of night. Luis said nothing else, just pointed at the date. 3 years to the day. When I asked dispatch if any retired units might have stored equipment logs from that time, they shook their heads. "Those files were corrupted," one of them said. "We lost everything from that quarter." Back at the station, Luis started packing up his locker. He didn't say he was leaving, but I knew. "I can't do another night run," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not after that." I stayed behind, staring at the blank entry space on our call sheet. No one believed us, no record, no proof, just the memory that kept playing on loop every time I closed my eyes. And deep down, I knew something had reached out to us that night. Not by mistake, but because we were the only ones still listening. It's been months now, but I still can't pass a quiet night without hearing that radio click in my head. Some part of me still waits for that same broken voice to come through, whispering our unit number like a secret that never died. I keep the old hospital band in a drawer, the one with Samuel Doran's name. I told myself I'd throw it away 100 times, but somehow it's always still there when I look. Luis transferred 2 towns over. We don't talk much anymore. Once in a while I get a short text from him. No words, just the time. 2:41. I don't ask why. Maybe he hears it too. Maybe that's all we can do now, acknowledge it without bringing it back to life. The department closed the report within a week. Equipment malfunction was the final note. I wanted to believe it, to bury the night under paperwork and caffeine. But some truths can't be logged or erased. They live in the small hours, in the static between signals, waiting for the next moment of silence to crawl through. Every call I take now feels different. When the radio crackles, my chest tightens before my brain even registers the words. I tell myself it's routine, that this time the voice on the other end will be real. But part of me still expects that same line, that same impossible address. Some nights I drive past Old Mill Road on purpose. I don't stop. I just slow down and look at the darkness where the trees bend toward the road. The fog still gathers there the way it did that night. Heavy, unmoving, endless. They say you forget the sound of rain after too many night shifts, but I haven't. It still taps the same way it did on that windshield, steady, patient, like it's trying to remind me of something I don't want to remember. Sometimes when I hear a siren far off in the distance, I see the dashboard clock in my head. Glowing green, frozen at 2:41 a.m. And I swear for a split second I hear someone whisper my name again, the same way he did.